A Venezuelan opposition supporter holds a placard with the image of human skeleton, Bolivar bills attached to it, and a legend reading "Going hungry" as he waits to listen to self-proclaimed acting President Juan Guaido on Jan. 25. Federico Parrra AFP Getty Images, by Andrew Bennett Ariya Hagh Daniel Krcmaric and Zacc Ritter January 26 at 7 a.m. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro is in trouble. Street protests against his leadership are growing. Opposition parliamentary leader Juan Guaido claims he is now Venezuela's interim president and has been recognized as such by the U.S., Canada, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and a host of other Latin American countries. However, many top Venezuelan military officers continue to support Maduro, raising the possibility of large-scale violence. President Trump has insisted that all options are on the table to remove Maduro, including economic sanctions on military force. But an unnamed administration official recently hinted that the U.S. might help Maduro achieve an exit solution, presumably exile, if he agrees to leave power peacefully, and Guaido has offered amnesty. But as other authors of this piece, Andrew Bennett, Ariya Hagh and Zacchary Ritter, find in our ongoing research, an exile with immunity from Maduro, essentially a golden parachute, may be difficult to achieve. Further, citizens may feel cheated if Maduro skirts justice and accountability. Yet coaxing Maduro out of office would certainly be less costly than a military intervention. So is a golden parachute possible? How would it work? Trump's challenge to Venezuela's president could lead to a military occupation. Here's why, and why that's dangerous. 1. The credible commitment problem. For a leader facing trouble at home, exile can be attractive. Compared to a domestic retirement, where a leader has to worry about whether to rely on promises of amnesty, exile has historically offered a credible promise of immunity. Recently, however, there has been a global justice cascade of human rights prosecutions that seek to hold leaders accountable wherever they are. Leaders like Liberia's Charles Taylor and Chad's Yassine Habba received international assurances of immunity if they accepted exile, only to be called into court later. Exile may no longer be seen as a safe exit guarantee. As one of us, Daniel Krcmaric, has shown, the new international prosecutions of leaders are reshaping exile patterns. He finds that previously, the leaders who'd committed human rights abuses went into exile at about the same rate as those who did not. But since the late 1990s, when the International Criminal Court, ICC, was created and Augusto Pinochet arrested, culpable leaders have been 6 times less likely to go into exile than leaders not responsible for mass abuses. Undermining the exile option for culpable leaders, Krcmaric argues, creates a justice dilemma. These leaders now have a hard time finding safe havens, and so have incentives to fight to the bitter end, as did Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. On the other hand, the prosecution threat may dissuade leaders from human rights violations in the first place. In other words, when dealing with problematic leaders, there's a trade-off between ending conflicts and deterring future abuses. How does this apply to Maduro? He may be reluctant to go into exile because the ICC opened a preliminary investigation in February 2018 into reports that his regime used excessive force against demonstrators. However, Maduro has not yet been found responsible for the kind of large-scale killing of civilians that the ICC usually indicts. He may prefer to accept foreign retirement before the violence escalates, so much that the ICC might issue arrest warrants. But the longer he stays in office, and the more abuses his forces commit, the harder it will be to offer a credible golden parachute. 2. Who might accept Maduro in exile? Krcmaric political scientist Abel Escriba Folch found that many leaders choose exile in neighboring or allied countries. But Maduro has alienated many of his neighbors, and his main foreign supporters, China, Cuba, Russia, and Turkey, may have reasons to refuse him. Russia, for example, has invested billions of dollars in Maduro and may prefer that he stay and fight rather than cede power. Still, the US and its allies might convince Cuba or another country to accept Maduro. Here are the 3 big shifts in Venezuela that you probably missed and will change what comes next. 3. The ratcheting effect. Once immunity is offered, it can be hard to convince an embattled leader that the offer will expire unless immediately accepted. In their working paper, Bennett, Hagh, and Ritter argue that leaders are likely to pocket the offer and stall for time while they try to wear down the opposition. Manuel Noriega, for example, prolonged his term in power through 2 different U.S. golden parachute offers until negotiations finally failed and the U.S. intervened by force. The U.S. can use economic sanctions, however, to convince Maduro that time is not on his side. 4. Coordination challenges. Many different parties have to coordinate to successfully offer exile. The government making the offer has to coordinate internally, as does that government and the dictator and the opposition, and factions within the dictators and group. All that offers many opportunities for miscommunication and failure. For instance, the offering government may be divided on whether to include amnesty, leading to mixed signals, as happened with Noriega. The opposition party might support a deal privately, but oppose it publicly, relaxing its overthrow efforts and hoping the foreign government will take over. Finally, incumbents may fear an internal coup and have to bargain to get colleagues' amnesty as well, or preempt hardliners' efforts to overthrow a prospective amnesty deal. Opponents often make secret negotiations public with their own spin to try to derail the deal. In other words, any golden parachute for Maduro will have to answer several questions: who might leave with him, and with what degree of immunity? Could Maduro and others access their foreign bank accounts? By what date would he have to step down? In short, achieving Maduro's peaceful exit, while preferable to military intervention, will require deft diplomacy to align the interests of many actors. Andrew Bennett at Exile is professor of government at Georgetown University. His research focuses on military interventions, alliance behavior, civil conflicts, and case study methods. Ariya Hagh is a PhD candidate in the Department of Government at Georgetown University. His research focuses on autocratic durability, nuclear weapons, and quantitative methods. Daniel Krcmaric is an assistant professor of political science at Northwestern University. He is finishing a book called The Justice Dilemma: Leaders, Exile, and Violence in an Era of Accountability, to be published with Cornell University Press. Zacc Ritter is a consulting analyst at Gallup Incorporated. His research focuses on unarmed insurrections, leadership security, and global public opinion of U.S. and Chinese leadership.